Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you so much for having me. It's my honor to be here. Don't confuse me with the David A. Harris that leads the American Jewish Committee. We are different David A. Harrises. That's a long and exhausting story of Jewish communal confusion. I'm going to try to keep my comments short for a couple reasons. One, because nobody, including my mom, wants to hear me speak uninterrupted for 15 minutes. And also because to try to help foster some questions and have a dialogue at the end. And third, because both my parents were academics who ran symposia just like this, and I have some idea what it's like to try to keep the trains running over the course of a day doing this. So, as said, my name is David Harris. I'm the head of the National Jewish Democratic Council. Our job, to give you some sense of from where I hail, is to maximize the Jewish support for Democrats at the federal and state level. This is what we do, spoken concisely. I can expand on that in questions and answers if anyone's curious, but this is what we do. We try to keep American Jews around the country voting Democratic. The content of what we're talking about here today is something that's fascinating to me because we have to deal with it constantly on an every 2-year basis. We heard from Mitt Romney in the debate the other day talking about binders full of women, but where we work, we have binders full of quotes about what's going to happen with the Jewish vote and expectations about the Jewish vote every 2 years. And this goes back, our binders literally go back to the mid-'70s with expectations about the dramatic shift that's finally going to happen in the Jewish vote. And I can jump to the end of the story if you want. It never happens. But we talk about it every 2 years congressionally and every 4 years at the presidential level. And it just doesn't happen. Overall, Jews have voted 3-1 Democratic since roughly the New Deal. I'm rounding here. More recently, looking just at the 70s and 80s, Jews have voted 60-some% for Democrats, except for 1980 when just 45% voted Democratic, 39% for Reagan. We'll come back to that. And in the 90s and 2000s, Jews voted for Democrats in the 70-something% range, except in 1992 when American Jews voted 80% Democratic for President Clinton against George H.W. Bush, who got a record low only 11% among American Jews. So the last 20 years, rounding again a little bit, has really seen Jews voting at or above 75% Democratic and at or well below 25% GOP. So here we are yet again talking about the possible shift in the Jewish vote, talking about the importance of the Jewish vote for important reasons, and Richard was mentioning them at the end and we were getting to it there. And yet we don't see, ultimately, as he got to in the punchline, a shift actually coming. There's no evidence in polling today that this is coming. And yet it's a constant churn in our headlines. And it's a fascinating thing to behold as I get the press calls on an hourly or daily basis. There's big caution as we look at the polls. The American Jewish Committee polling is incredibly rigorous. The Gallup polls are rigorous and thoughtful. Whenever we see a poll that says that a big shift is coming, we always immediately call the pollster and discover that the Jewish sample is the size of, and I kid you not, 13 or 21 or 19. And polls like this get released sometimes, and sometimes well-meaning people, sometimes people with a particular proclivity push these polls out, knowing full well that the Jewish sample is tiny. So there's always has to be a huge caution in looking at Jewish polling. But every authoritative poll with an acceptable margin of error in the Jewish community over the past 18 months has shown every successive poll polling Mr. Romney against the president, every successive poll has shown Mr. Romney doing worse progressively in the Jewish community and President Obama doing better in the Jewish community, by which I mean that the best poll for the president in the Jewish community is the most recent poll, the most recent Gallup survey and the most recent American Jewish Committee survey, which we just saw. I would go over the numbers, but Richard just went over them pretty thoroughly. I would just hone one point. He compared the numbers to 2008, to the same time frame in 2008. I would point out that it's not just that the president is doing as good as Mitt Romney, as good against Mitt Romney now as he was against John McCain in 2008. He's doing 8 points better against Mitt Romney now than he did as an unknown against John McCain there. 8 points better. So the bottom line here, to me, is that there's all this talk about the Jewish vote and a great shift that might be happening without any actual basis in polling, which is just fascinating. And it's for some of the reasons we got it at the end. What could happen with a very marginal change in Jewish turnout in Florida, possibly Ohio, not really in Pennsylvania. So my job here and always, is not to explain what I want to happen, what I hope will happen, or what I pray in synagogue will happen, but I get the good fortune of just having to explain what actually is happening, because this is happening. This is something that's happened over the course of many decades and seems to be happening again today. I'd love to claim complete credit for it, that it's all my work and all our organization's work or Ira Foreman's work or whatever. It's not the case. There are other forces at play. So my job is to explain why has this been the case over the course of 80 years now. Why are American Jews such a reliably democratic voting bloc since the New Deal? The one claim that bothers me so much that I hear so often is that it's out of habit, which I think most thinking people, I would hope, would find a bit offensive, as I do, because it implies that one votes on either side of the aisle. If you're a thoughtful Republican or a thoughtful Democrat, that you do this just reflexively. So I'm just going to put that to the side for right now. Early on, 40s, 50s, 60s, I think organized labor, Jewish connection to unions from a different time, I think this played a major role. But really the issues driving the Jewish vote today, I would argue, are very much the same issues that have driven the Jewish community in the last 30 and 40 years. And I'll review some of them right now. Choice is, I think, one of the most important issues driving this election, frankly. And I have some insight through polling data, but it's not just my polling data, it's also the American Jewish Committee polling data. Some of this is based on the values survey that was done recently by the Workmen's Circle. American Jews are the most pro-choice demographic of any demographic that you could conceivably design. Upwards of 92% of American Jews, by some definition, are pro-choice. This doesn't just mean that Jewish women are pro-choice, of course. This means that Jewish women are pro-choice, Jewish men are pro-choice, and some slice of Orthodox Jews must be pro-choice, or else there's no way you can get to 92%. This issue has been brought into more stark relief in this campaign than the last few presidential campaigns, with the rise of Todd Akin in Missouri. One party, there's an honest disagreement between these parties, an honest and loud disagreement. We've seen it come up in the debates, be it through Supreme Court appointments and others, the legitimate rape comments that came out of Missouri, the GOP platform, which says there should be no exceptions, including rape in the life of the mother, although Mitt Romney differs from that. There's honest disagreements, and we're talking about a 92% pro-choice community, much more pro-choice than women in America as a whole. So this is a huge motivating factor and social issue for the American Jewish community. The issue of equal pay also is one that incredibly motivates American Jews, men and women alike, especially women, but men and women alike. We've heard the president talk about this in the debate. We heard the question in the town hall meeting where the famous binders full of women answer came up. The president, as everyone probably knows by now, the first thing he did when he became president was sign the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. This is something that was heralded widely in the American Jewish community and widely noticed. This is something that Governor Romney has refused to say whether he'd support into law. It's critical to women, but it's something that was very closely watched by American Jews. And on a values basis, polling data reflects that this is something that American Jews watch very closely. The social safety net, and this is something also that the Workmen's Circle values survey demonstrated, that broadly speaking, the sense that American Jews want to make sure that the poor and underprivileged are cared for, even if it costs wealthy American Jews more. This is something that American Jews feel very strongly about. This comes through specifically when it comes to Medicare and the possibility of Medicare cuts, when it comes to reading through the details of the Romney-Ryan budget plan, and benefits for the poor and the near poor alike. For the same reasons, for many of the same reasons, through polling data we've been able to figure out, American Jews, by and large, though not by as wide a margins, by and large, are supportive of Obamacare and the assurance that there will be a lower cost health care availability for all, and the health care rolls will be, the insurance rolls will be increased by tens of millions of folks. On the civil rights front, it's worth noting that American Jews also feel incredibly strongly about a range of civil rights issues, whether it be repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or the president's more recent comments on marriage equality. American Jews, and I don't know, it may come as a surprise to you, American Jews are more supportive of marriage equality than any other faith stream in America by far. The number is about 82 or 81%, depending on how you poll this issue. So This is something that American Jews follow closely, and again, it cuts across faith division streams within American Jews. So this comes to stopping fighting DOMA, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell, repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and the president's comments on marriage equality. Another category that I just throw out there is what I call the Flat Earth Society crowd. This is something that I think it's hard to measure, doesn't really come up in polling, but I think I have a hunch that it drives the American Jewish community crazy. On one end of the spectrum, things that we can poll for are things like Mitt Romney's and other House and Senate Republican leaders' refusal to recognize global climate change being man-made. This is something that's universally recognized in the American Jewish community. On the other end of the spectrum are Steve King, Representative Steve King, who's a conservative leader, who Mitt Romney has stumped for, saying yesterday that it may be legal to ban birth control. I'm not sure why that's a starter or why we're talking about that, but he is, and making some other crazy claims like he still doesn't know where the president was born. These things are sort of off the charts for American Jews and remind them about which party they're with and broadly why. I've left the category of Israel and Iran for last for a good reason. And it has to do with what Richard cited, that poll after poll demonstrates that American Jews list this as items 6, 7, 8, or after in their priorities for voting. Some people try and scream that this is a terrible indication that American Jews are distanced from Israel, and it's just not the case. I view it as an incredible success story from AIPAC and the organized Jewish community in America to bring about basically some sort of assurance that among major party candidates and among the House and Senate Democratic and Republican Party leadership, there is broad-based support for support and an ironclad relationship with Israel. And because of this, American Jews move on to other issues because they feel reassured that Barack Obama will support Israel, that Mitt Romney will support Israel, that George W. Bush will support Israel, etc. However, Israel is a litmus test, and it jumps to number 2 or number 1 whenever American Jewish voters feel that a candidate may not support Israel. We saw this writ large in the 2 cases that I cited earlier. When George H.W. Bush challenged AIPAC citizen lobbyists on Capitol Hill, and he took a number of other steps, he dropped down to 11% support, raising Bill Clinton's support up to 80%, and it would have been higher except there was a third-party candidate in 1992. Similarly, because of Jimmy Carter and some of the things he did and said in his presidency, Ronald Reagan received an all-time high in support among American Jews of 39%, and Democratic support dropped all the way down to 45%. These are the 2 records of the modern era. I think they both demonstrate that where a candidate ventures outside of a mainstream on either side of the aisle, ventures out of a mainstream comfort zone for American Jews, Israel can become a bullet and can go up to number 1. But otherwise, it's really a litmus test. And Barack Obama has more than met that litmus test, and that's what we see in the polling from AJC, from Gallup, from all these other organizations, a $10+ million effort to smear him notwithstanding. This is a president that, and beyond the $3.1 billion in aid to Israel, has made sure that Israel gets additional funds for Iron Dome and for Arrow and David's Sling missile defense systems, more than twice as much as the previous administration. This is the president, the only president since Israel's inception that has assured that Israel has a perfect support, a perfect American voting record at the United Nations. This is a president that has answered several 3 a.m. phone calls from Prime Minister Netanyahu to make sure that Israel got everything that it needed to fight the Carmel forest fire, to make sure that Israeli diplomats whose life was in jeopardy in Cairo, that their lives would be saved. This is the president that gathered a global coalition to help stop Iran, which is something that is still in the news today that we'll hear more about tonight. This is a president that restored qualitative military advantage, Israel's qualitative military edge in the region, that, as Israel's generals said, had eroded in recent previous years. There's an unrivaled, unprecedented level of security and strategic cooperation between the 2 countries that I think many members of the Republican Party on the Hill can agree to, and they try to find other things to point to instead of pointing to specifically that. I can give a 20 or 30-minute talk on that alone. But all these categories taken together, I think, help to explain why American Jews are so overwhelmingly Democrats, why out of all the members of the House and Senate who are Jewish, all but 1 are Democrats, Same thing at the Congress, and, at the state level and beyond. It also helps to explain, frankly, why my job is a little bit easier than my opponents on the other side of the aisle. And it similarly helps to explain, I would argue, why in 15 days, once again, the vast majority of American Jews are going to support the Democratic ticket. I'm glad to take any questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. I'll ask you a quick question. Put on your most objective cap. What is President Obama's greatest liability on what issue vis-a-vis a voter that voted for a Jewish voter that voted for President Obama 4 years ago?
Oh. Any members of the press here? Yes. What outlet do you represent?
Washington Jewish Week.
No liabilities.
Yes, it's usually not my job to try to undermine the president, but look, I'll put it in the most diplomatic way I can. The president is a cool guy. You may see it, except when he's in the heat of the moment campaigning. He's a cool guy. He manages a lot of crises. He does so coolly and calmly and directly. He's not the most effusive personal guy. Even when I see him with his wife and kids. I'm sure in private he is more so, but this is just who he is. He has certainly also been this way with the prime minister. I haven't exactly seen him hug Angela Merkel. I haven't exactly seen him hug other foreign leaders either. But Jews are uniquely paranoid. Jews uniquely want to see the way that Bill Clinton, the way that George H.W. Bush, in very, very different ways, emoted when they met with Israeli leaders. And that's absolutely an issue. They have a very serious, very workmanlike relationship. They have met more, this president has met more with Bibi Netanyahu than any other foreign leader. There are an unfortunate series of myths about snubs that have happened when Benjamin Netanyahu has visited the United States. The foreign ministry in Israel has worked assiduously to try to counter these myths. They persist nonetheless, and I think the reason that they do is because of this background narrative that he is absolutely cool, and by the way, they are politically very different. So that's a truth. Having said that, they have worked to achieve a great deal together in terms of unprecedented levels of Israel's military cooperation. So it has to be, it can be fairly recognized that they are not, I doubt that they are the type of people that if they were at Camp David together, they would hold hands and skip through the flowers, although President Obama is not that person who would naturally do that, I think, with any foreign leader.
A couple of quick questions from the audience for Mr. Harris. Yes, sir? We're just going to give you a mic.
Do you have any explanation why part of American Jewish community, people who immigrated for the last 30, 40 years from Soviet Union and communist countries of Eastern Europe, vote inversely different, inversely opposite, like 80% for Republicans and 20% for Democrats. And it is according to American Jewish Committee survey. Could you explain why it's happening?
My short answer is no. No, and it's something we've thought about a great deal. Part of it has to do with our own failure, I would argue, and maybe it's my own arrogance in saying this. Part of it, I would like to think, is our collective failure from our side of the aisle in making thoughtful outreach, including in the case of Russian immigrants, making Russian language outreach through Russian media, things like that in the right parts of New York, for example. That's one thing. The figures that I've seen in other polling, it's not that high, but there's obviously a disparity. It's obviously not, Russian immigrants obviously do not vote overwhelmingly Democratic, and they obviously do not vote Democratic. So we would agree, we could quibble about the numbers, but it's obviously, they're not core supporters of the Democratic Party or President Obama's. There's an unfortunate lack of outreach, I would argue, and I don't have, I'm worried that any answer I would give would be too off the cuff and ill-considered. I don't have a good answer. It's something we've given some good thought to, and I'm not happy with the answers we've come up with, short of the fact that we are not thoughtfully sharing facts with them the way we share facts with everybody else, partly due to language barriers. What we do invariably when we're confronted with, we don't have $10 or $15 million. There is a $10 or $15 million effort in video, in print, in billboards, and all of these things, spreading sometimes distortions of the president's record, particularly on Israel and Iran, and sometimes, unfortunately, outright lies that are called that by political fact checkers and the like. So we don't have that much money, but with the money we do have, all we do is share facts, direct, documented, cited facts, because we feel that's the best thing we can do. My concern is that we're not doing it enough targeted into those communities, including in the ways that people want to hear them.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Harris. We have to move on. Thank you.
Thank you.